Welcome to a special edition of Weather Snap. It's Tuesday, the 27th of September. I'm Clare Nasir, and today I'm talking to tropical prediction scientist Julian Hemming, the latest on Hurricane Ian and Typhoon Noru. Julian, first of all, let's talk about Hurricane Ian. It's around mid afternoon here in the UK. What's happened in the last few hours?
Well, Hurricane Ian intensified quite rapidly over the last day or so and came ashore earlier on Tuesday over Cuba. And it was category 3 at that time with sustained winds in the region of 125 miles an hour. So Ian has been moving across Cuba and still appears to be keeping fairly intact as a hurricane. And he's moving out into the very warm waters of the southeastern Gulf of Mexico now.
Will Ian intensify further?
It's quite possible that it could intensify further because the waters are very warm in that area and the conditions are right at the moment. So further intensification is possible. Now, there is a possibility of a slight weakening before the next landfall, which will be over Florida, because the atmospheric conditions might become a little less favorable, a little more of what we call wind shear, which could weaken the storm. But even if it does weaken, it'll only be a fairly minimal amount. And it still might retain major hurricane status, category 3, when it makes landfall over the west coast of Florida.
So, very concerning, a major hurricane surging towards the western side of Florida. Can we be more specific about where we're likely to see this hurricane make landfall and when?
Well, over the last few days, there's actually been quite a lot of uncertainty over the forecast track of Hurricane Ian once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. And anywhere from the Florida Panhandle in the north right down to the southern part of Florida were possible landfall locations. Now, it seems to have narrowed down a bit now as we get closer to the event. So we're looking at landfall of the eye itself being somewhere in the region between Tampa and Fort Myers, Port Charlotte sort of area of the west coast of Florida. Again, it'd be very important precisely where the eye makes landfall in terms of the impacts from storm surge, because the storm surge would typically be a lot more on the southern flank of the eye, and there are some bays in that area which could see some high amounts of storm surge.
What sort of numbers are we talking about in terms of storm surge?
Typically, we could see 1 to 2 meters of storm surge in quite a few locations, but it's possible in those areas which are just located to the southern part of the eye, they could see as much as 3 meters of storm surge. But it should be emphasized that there are other hazards as well, which will actually be more widespread. There'll be large amounts of rainfall. Again, we could be looking at 150 to 300 millimeters in many places, and possibly as much as 500 in a few places. And again, as we've said, the hurricane is making landfall as a major hurricane, so wind strengths could be in excess of well in excess of 100 miles an hour in some places. We expect landfall to be late Wednesday into early Thursday UK time, so it could be USA time later on Wednesday. But what we do expect is that there could be some slowing down of the storm as it makes landfall. So it could linger over the central part of Florida right through Thursday and even into Friday. And that will essentially exacerbate the situation with rainfall and possible flooding, even though the winds will die down as it moves inland.
Where are we expecting the storm to go next? Is it likely to track along the eastern seaboard of the US, or is it likely to go out to sea again?
That's a good question, because the computer models are suggesting a very fine margin between whether it stays over land and moves northwards through Florida, or whether it does just emerge out over the Atlantic and maybe makes another landfall. But whatever happens, we do expect a slow movement northwards over the next few days. So even further north than Florida, probably into Georgia and South Carolina, there could be some impacts from heavy rain over the next few days.
So, a slow moving major hurricane heading towards Florida and beyond. It's just not good news. And our thoughts, obviously, are with the communities who are likely to be impacted by that storm. Let's now head to the Pacific, where there's an equally powerful storm pushing towards Vietnam this time.
Yes, that's right. Typhoon Noru actually developed to the east of the Philippines and did hit the central part of the Philippines a few days ago and caused some severe damage, disruption, some flooding in that region, and some wind damage. It passed across the Philippines and has moved out into the South China Sea. And as hurricanes and typhoons often do, once they move back over the sea, they have a chance to re-strengthen over the warm waters. This one, Noru, is expected to make landfall during Tuesday evening UK time over Vietnam. It's currently looking as if it'll come ashore just to the south of Da Nang, which is a large city, over 1 million population in that part of Vietnam. So we expect impacts again from storm surge, some from the wind impacts, because Typhoon Noru is again very strong. Its wind strengths are in excess of 100 miles an hour around the center of the storm. And we expect heavy rain to then move in across Vietnam and into other parts of Southeast Asia further inland over the next few days.
So, millions of people affected by this tropical storm as well. It's very active on both sides of the Northern Hemisphere. Thank you very much, Julian. And obviously, we can learn more by looking at the Met Office Storms Twitter feed, which is always updated.